The Galien Foundation fosters, recognizes, and rewards excellence in scientific innovation to improve the human condition.
André Malraux said once in one of his novels, "Une vie humaine ne vaut rien, mais rien ne vaut une vie humaine." Human life is worth nothing, but nothing is worth a human life. All these men and women are trying to save human lives. Is there anything more noble than that?
The Galien Awards ceremony is considered the equivalent of the Oscars night for the innovators in the labs and awards every year Best Pharmaceutical Product, Best Biotechnology Product, Best Product for Orphan Rare Diseases, Best Medical Technology, Best Digital Health Solution, Best Incubator Accelerator Equity, Best Startup. Around the globe, the Prix Galien is considered as the equivalent of the Nobel Prize for the industry, mobilizing an unrivaled network of Nobel laureates and top biomedical scientists. The Galien Foundation manages an independent, cross-functional, and geographically diverse program of events and sponsorship to brand the best of the best in new medicines and diagnostics. The Prix Galien is a welcome initiative to stimulate creative research and promote excellence. Barack Obama. The Roy Vagelos Pro Bono Humanum Award for Global Health Equity is bestowed to an individual, a company, an academic institution, or a non-governmental agency that has helped to improve the human condition through the application of biopharmaceutical science to problems of developing or underserved populations worldwide.
This is the right event, on the right issue, at the right time.
Staging this event in Africa is a significant statement that science and innovation are needed as much here in Africa as anywhere else.
I'm particularly grateful to receive this award.
The awards are among the highest honors in science and commerce because they lead to improvement in the human condition.
The Prix Galien Awards recognize the world's brightest minds and most innovative companies. They are a true celebration of the hard work required to produce life-changing interventions.
That is what makes us optimistic about the future.
Congratulations to all of you.
Make a difference. Join the Galien Foundation.
Wow, what an honor to follow that video with so many important people. Welcome to the Galien Foundation Week of Biomedical Innovation webinar, celebrating the best of the very best in life sciences innovation that improves the human condition. I'm Kevin Brubaker, a managing director with Accenture Life Science Strategy, focused primarily on rare disease and cell and gene therapy. And on behalf of the Prix Galien USA Awards Committee, it's a pleasure for me to chair this webinar, presenting the 4 of the nominated rare disease products in preparation for what has become a very much celebrated annual event, the Prix Galien USA Awards, this coming Thursday at the American Museum of Natural History in New York. We'll be announcing the winners of what we consider the single best innovative product brought forward by our industry in each of 7 distinctive therapeutic categories: pharmaceuticals, biotechnology, orphan and rare diseases, medical devices and diagnostics, digital health solutions, and also for accelerator, incubator investors and startup firms, respectively. Our focus today is on the rare disease category, with 7,000 rare diseases still waiting for a treatment or a cure. The recognition of work in this area is critical in assessing the state of science for technologies that bring forward new options for the patients and families who desperately need them. In that regards, it represents a great opportunity for me and my fellow panelists from the nominee companies here today to reflect on the gains the industry's made in treating what were once largely incurable and neglected conditions affecting some of our sickest patients worldwide. Discussion will hopefully shed light on the challenges of the journey from bench to bedside that 4 of the nominated products encountered in their own unique and ultimately very successful ways. So I'd like to introduce the panelist representatives and their nominated products. And perhaps I could have each panelist introduce themselves, where they're coming from and their product. And Monica, perhaps we can start with you for introductions.
Sure. So my name is Monica Kumar. I'm the Global Project Head of Lipidase Alpha. I'm an MD by training, and I am here for Xenpozyme, or Lipidase Alpha, RPCP. And I'll tell you a little bit about the disease, and then I'll tell you about our product. So acid sphingomyelinase deficiency is historically known as Niemann-Pick disease types A, B, and B. It's a rare progressive genetic disease, and it can have significant morbidity and lead to early mortality. Signs and symptoms of ASMD can present in either infancy, childhood, or adulthood. There's really a spectrum, as I told you, with the A to B. And symptoms can include things like an enlarged spleen or liver, difficulty breathing, lung infections, and unusual bruising or bleeding. Xenpozyme is an enzyme replacement therapy for the treatment of non-central nervous system manifestations of ASMD in both adult and pediatric patients. And then in terms of unmet medical need, prior to the approval of Xenpozyme, the management of ASMD was largely supportive, and it was also, entailed monitoring to detect potential disease complications. The estimated prevalence of ASMD is 0.4 to 0.6 per 100,000 births. It's been estimated that there are less than 120 individuals living with ASMD in the US. In terms of the approval of Xenpozyme, we actually did have breakthrough designation from the FDA and were reviewed under priority review.
It's a great review. So let's go around our squares for continued introductions. So Bahija, perhaps we could go to you.
Sure. Thank you for the opportunity. I'm Bahija Jalal. I'm the CEO of Immunocore. The product that we have the pleasure of talking about today is a bispecific TCR, so Kimmtrak. Starting with the disease that we are treating here is uveal melanoma. This is a melanoma that very different than the skin melanoma. It occurs behind the eye. After the first diagnosis and the first treatment, that could lead to a loss of the eye. 50% of the patients will have metastasis, and 90% of the metastasis will be to the liver. Once they have the metastasis, the prognosis is basically 1 year to live. So up until now, for 4 decades, nothing has worked in this indication. No chemotherapy, no immunotherapy, and nothing. So we have a new and novel technology that's basically, it's a bispecific that uses the best weapon we have in the body, which is the TCR, the T-cell receptor, in one arm, and on the other arm, the TCR receptor basically unveils the tumor, or makes the tumor more visible, and on the other side is bringing the T cells to kill the tumor. So this technology has the power to tune up and tune down the immune system, so it can be used in multiple indications. So what we have done for the first time ever, we have actually brought this treatment to the uveal melanoma. We showed that this treatment actually extends life. So we had a phase 3 that was very positive. We also now launched and brought that to patients that need it. And we just this week, actually at ESMO, showed the 3-year survival. So it's absolutely helping this patient that had nothing. So just to finish on that, this is also from the innovation point of view, this is the world's first TCR therapy. It's the first treatment for metastatic uveal melanoma ever, and is also the first TCR therapy and bispecific that shows overall survival in solid tumors. Thank you.
Fantastic. And I think the only thing more rare than rare disease patients are rare disease industry experts. And I've come to know that Bill and Bahicha knew each other. So Bill, perhaps we can go to you.
Sorry, thanks, Kevin. It's a pleasure to be here with you. Our therapy is Hemgenix, which is done in partnership with Unicure. And it's a therapy for hemophilia B. Hemophilia B is the rarer of the two hemophilias. It is about 1 in 40,000 live births to males in the United States. And it's associated with destructive bleeding episodes that really impair people's standard of life and actually can be life-threatening and lead to death in certain circumstances. CSL, the company I'm with, I'm the head of R&D at CSL, has actually been in the business of hemophilia B, Kevin, for 40 years. So we're the largest collector and manufacturer of plasma in the world. So we've been supplying a plasma-derived factor 9, which is the factor that's missing in hemophilia B. That helps the clotting cascade. We've been supplying plasma-derived factor 9 for many years, and of course have a recombinant factor 9 as well. And both are fairly effective, but still patients bleed, still their quality of life is impaired, and they have to take IV infusions very regularly. In the case of plasma-derived factors, multiple times a week, and recombinants once every 2 weeks or so. So we partner with Unicure to get an even better therapy, and that's what we think Hemgenix is. And it's an adeno-associated virus subtype 5 is the vector that the gene is on, and it's a modified factor 9 gene with what's called a Padua variant, which has increased activity, and that's infused one time, and we've seen factor levels stay up for now up to 4 or 5 years, and with associated almost complete resolution of bleeds. So people are now living a life that's both normal in terms of quality of life and bleeds, but also in the fact that they're no longer having to take therapy. So it's been a remarkable journey to get this on the market, and it's now the first gene therapy approved for hemophilia B. So we're quite proud of that, particularly given our history of hemophilia B involvement.
Wonderful innovation. And why don't we move over to Germany then with you, Arup?
All right, thank you, Kevin. Thank you. It's a privilege and pleasure to be here representing colleagues from BI here in Germany. Let me talk to you about a disease condition which is called generalized pustular psoriasis. Generalized pustular psoriasis is not psoriasis as we know it. It was discovered by von Zambusch not very far from here in Ingelheim in Germany for a condition called pustular psoriasis. And what it essentially is a disease condition, which is a chronic condition, but it has episodes of very acute lapses where the body is infested with pustular lesions all over. Very different from the so-called pustular psoriasis, but it's called generalized. And that's a different code that is used to identify generalized pustular psoriasis. The condition itself is really an innate neutrophilic dermatotic condition. It is believed that it is the IL-36 pathway for which, when it sort of flares, you basically have cytokines being released and a very intense inflammatory condition that exudes around the body. One very unfortunate part about this disease, generalized pustular psoriasis, is the mortality rate is anything between 4 to 6%. We see many patients with this condition, unfortunately, who have not been treated landing up in particularly ICUs, and 25% of them do so. The condition is intense, it's acute. We have obviously been privileged to get a approval in the United States for the acute condition of generalized pustular psoriasis. And what it essentially does is it very quickly stops the progression of the pustular condition and very quickly sort of reverts it. It is unfortunate that when they think of the skin as that protective mechanism, it is lost. And when I say it is rare, there are not more than 10 to 20 per million patients in the United States who have this disease condition. So I'm happy to talk to you more about the pathway, but very, very fortunate that we today have a therapy which is the first humanized monoclonal antibody for this treatment through IL-36 pathway inhibition. Kevin?
Well, congratulations to all four of you for these wonderful innovations and to be part of those with your companies. So for the audience, I just wanted to mention that there's a link to a short company profile for each of these products, and the link's going to be available throughout today's webcast, so you can just click on that. We've allocated some questions for you also, the viewers, for after our panel discussion. You can submit your questions anytime during the webcast using the link provided on your screen, and we'll try and get to as many of them as we can. And really what we want to cover today relates to a couple of central themes. How has the private sector responded to the substantial unmet medical needs for patients and families confronting a rare disease, particularly as research advances on the genetic and biological origins of so many of these conditions? And also, what new pharmaceutical and diagnostic interventions can the industry now offer patients to treat afflictions that we once considered, pretty much incurable? So I think what I'd like to do is if the panel agrees, we'd like to move on to a discussion, and I'll walk each of you through a few questions, and then we can open it up for some key lessons that you've all learned along the way. So Monica, can we start with you? And I think you're on mute also.
Okay.
That's our new life. That's our new life now that we're virtual so much now. So why don't we start with this question? Tell us why your company chose to focus on your disease state and indication associated with your product, and how significant was the level of unmet medical need?
Okay, so lysosomal storage disorders are a group of rare genetic conditions caused by enzyme deficiencies, and they're really a cornerstone of Sanofi's business and an area that we are very well known for. So we've been a leader in the rare disease space for the past 40 years. We started with Gaucher's, then we expanded to Fabry, Pompe, MPS I, and now acid sphingomyelinase deficiency. So it was really a natural progression for us in terms of what the company is known for. And in terms of the unmet medical need, I think I'd already mentioned that this is a very rare disease. There was no therapy before this, and basically there was symptomatic management. The prevalence is about 0.4 to 0.6 per 100,000. There are about less than 120 patients in the US and about 2,000 patients in the US, EU, and Japan. So even though this is a rare disease, it was, there was a significant unmet medical need.
Very good. And clinician response to date?
Clinicians have been very excited about the therapy. This is a drug that has been in development for over 20 years. So it was anticipated. And so clinicians are very happy to be able to offer this to patients and, are very happy with the response that they're getting. And I can go into the details of the trials if you want to do that as well.
I think that would be interesting, and in particular, the patient impact on clinical outcomes would probably be interesting for the audience.
Yeah, so we showed clinically relevant improvement in two two pivotal trials, or one pivotal and one pediatric trial. It was a phase 2 adult trial, and then in pediatrics, the phase 1/2 trial. And we showed an effect on lung function, so DLCO, diffusion capacity of carbon monoxide, spleen and liver volumes, and platelets. We also have long-term data that shows a sustained improvement in all of those outcomes as well. So it was really nice to see that data.
Interesting. And just in terms of pathway, I've just seen in so many rare disease developments sort of hiccups along the way or bumps along the way. So what can you, not that you encountered a lot of those, but what can you tell us about the challenges that Sanofi confronted, as you transition from early proof of concept to human subject testing and getting a marketing authorization?
So although the IND for lipidase alpha was filed in 2005, development didn't start until 2010 because we had to further investigate the drug in a non-clinical setting. Treatment in the early trials revealed that we needed to use a dose escalation regimen to minimize the risk of having an infusion-associated reaction and impact on the liver. The other thing that was challenging is the complexity of the lipidase alpha molecule and its development. And finally, I would say that we really persevered because, as you heard, it took over 20 years to develop this drug. We collaborated very closely with the NNPDF, a patient organization, and as well as the FDA. And I think that was also key in the success that, all of those collaborations.
It's a really interesting story, and I mean, any comments on how the team responded to challenges along the way? Has it always been the same team?
No, it's been a different team. I have been on this project since 2018, I believe. So the team has evolved along the way. I think we have all, especially during the approval, we learned to work together as a team, and we've turned into a very well-oiled machine, and in terms of being able to handle all kinds of questions and challenges, and everybody really just rises to the occasion. I think there was a lot of perseverance. It was during COVID, and so everybody was isolated in their own houses and locked away. And I think we were also extremely lucky to be able to have the technology that we did, to be able to collaborate seamlessly over Zoom. And I think now everybody has adapted to working remotely. But I think COVID really taught us that. So it was perseverance during, personal challenges that everybody was going through on the team, unique, I'm sure, or common to everybody here. And then, also going through the submission process.
Yeah, COVID impact on things like clinical development and regulatory. That's a whole nother webinar, isn't it?
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay. Well, Monica, thank you. Arup, maybe we could go to you and run through that series of questions as well. Maybe tell us about Boehringer Ingelheim's focus on the disease state and indication associated with your product, and tell us a little bit more about the unmet medical need.
Right. So perhaps I'll start with the fact that BI invests more than 20% of its net sales in R&D, quite atypical for most companies. They've actually moved into this rare and orphan disease, unlike many other companies, very recently. When you look at that, as they are looking across assets, they do have the IL-36 pathway. And as you focused on that patient, very quickly you have to remember there are almost 6,000 to 7,000 rare diseases. 5,500 diseases are ICD coded. 95% do not have treatment. So it's where BI wanted to be. It wanted to be a bit of a voice for the patient and exploring itself. The GPP patient the number is a few, but there are three components essentially around the patient which are very instrumental. One is the disease state. The patients who suffer from GPP particularly have mental conditions like most skin conditions. They don't want to be seen. So when we think about treatment, we also think about how you want to resolve someone who's got a very acute pustular condition in a very rare state. Conditions where physicians take 6 to 7 years to try and understand. So the company made a big foray into this dimension where they said, look, many of these patients die. Many of these patients in between their flares have a mental condition very unlike others. So there's something called a DLQI score. So the way the clinical trial was designed, unfortunately, you cannot have a clinical trial versus standard of care, which is placebo. Finding a patient with GPP, particularly in rare disease, is difficult to find. As they began to do the clinical trial, one dimension was understanding the physiological look as physicians saw it. So they had different gradings. Traditionally, they use scores which were for psoriasis, but it had to be reconverted to GPA-like scores for psoriatic conditions. Many of these, as soon as 48 hours upon treatment, 58% of them responded to treatment. And then obviously within a period of 2 weeks, many of them had clear skin, depending on the grading. The other scoring that one had to look at was also the mental score. What was the disease state? How did that feel? How did that resolve? When you compare this versus other standards of care, particularly around many skin conditions, the turnaround for the intermittent between flares to treatment, it was a huge improvement in many patients from a DRQS score perspective. Many of them, when you looked at compared to the placebo-controlled trial, which was on the other hand, the risk-benefit profile really meant that physicians saw and liked what they saw. Physicians felt good. The infection rates fell. And essentially, it became a promise because of the huge cost of healthcare utilization, the probabilized risk for re-entry to a hospital, outpatient treatment instead of inpatient became a sort of conduit for which the drug was basically the trials, which was called FSL, began. And we are also looking at FSL2, which is then between what we call acute flares, a prevention strategy for patients with GPP. So essentially, it was around the patient. The focus has been there. And the number of patients, like I said, in the US is small. Around the world, the patient numbers, depending on the geography, are not that many. So anything between 10 to 20 to 30 per million or 10 to 30,000 per 100, depending on where the geography is. So I speak to you for the US, the numbers are small. Perhaps in other parts, in other geographies, where you may have some familial predisposition, then the numbers may be a bit more.
Very good. And patient and physician response? Well, how is that?
It's phenomenal. Many patients have flares, and they may have 2 or 3 flares in the last 2 or 3 years. And when you have a flare, many a time they'll end up in an ICU or in a hospital. So, when you get treated and you see responses within 48 hours and probably clear skin in 2 weeks, it's the first time many have had. When you use standard biologics and other treatments, it may take you 6 months to get a little bit of skin clearance. So for the patients who've been suffering these diseases, some who never made it to the clinic, it was a big experience. For physicians, it was sort of a miracle. Like for so many years, they tried every other standard of care because that's what doctors want to do. They want to treat. So physicians really liked what they saw. They were very impressed. And I think both physicians and patients who played a huge part of the trial came back saying all the good and positive things, which is where the investment made a lot of sense. And most importantly, the two communities felt that they got what they wanted to see, and perhaps even better than what they expected to be the outcome.
Very interesting. So, and Monica told us an interesting story about sort of the pathway and the challenges she found along the way, or the team found along the way. What could you tell us about moving from proof of concept to license? Any challenges?
A lot of challenges. So when you think of the IL-36, think of an upstream and downstream effect, in the genotype that is in those patients. Now, we've obviously looked at IL-36 in different indications, and many of those indications looked at neutrophilic dermatologic conditions, which are many. one of the things which was very amazing, and BI took a stand saying, look, we saw this response, even though there were multiple indications. And they said, look, what we saw in this patient community, the way it was resolving, said, let's switch a strategy. Let's go in for the acute, because there was an acute need in this indication to treat the patient first beyond broader indications. So, I joined the company 3 years ago, but it was really good for the leadership, the medical community, and the academics to say this is the right thing to do. So it was not what they expected to do 5 years ago, but it was a switch which said, if the patients were meaningful, let's make this happen first, and let's hold back a little bit on the other. And this became the focus for BI in the last 3 years. So we basically had to expedite approval, bring it up 18 months earlier. That was one whole organization coming together with patient and physician communities around making it happen. It was a learning, but it was a very good one.
Well, it sounds like a wonderful endeavor, and thankful patients and physicians. Bahija, why don't we move to you? So tell us about your company's focus for the nominated product, and a little bit more about the unmet medical need.
Yeah, so I'll start with our mission was really, if we're gonna do go against cancer, and especially the rare cancers, we wanted to do something that radically improve the outcome, not just a little bit, but it has to be radical. And I think uveal melanoma was the biggest challenge, and we took on that challenge because these patients had nothing. It is very devastating when you hear most of these patients, the liver is the hardest one. When you have a tumor in the liver, that's the hardest one to resolve. And most of the patients will tell you that when they get diagnosed, basically they're told you have to go and get your affairs in order because they have less than a year. So it was a big challenge to go there, but for, like I said, 4 decades, there was nothing has worked, not even chemotherapy. So we took on that challenge and we said, if we're going to show that this technology works, uveal melanoma is it. So we had several challenges along the way because it was completely novel approach. So that meant we had to establish every single step of the drug development. We had to invent it and establish it ourselves. And then in the clinic, we had our technology brings the T cells to the tumor. That means the tumor is not what we usually expect from chemotherapy, which reduces the size of the tumor. These will increase the size of the tumor, but it's not a tumor growth. So that could be, for a lot of people who saw that in phase 1, almost didn't think it was working. But it is really important to always talk to investigators. And investigators kept on telling us, I have patients, they should not be alive today, who are alive on this drug. So something is happening and it's working. So we actually, took on the challenge of going into phase 3 and said, we're going to go to look for overall survival. Usually you look for, the response rate and looking at the size. This was a very novel mechanism where it's not working like others. And we actually had in phase 3 was just beautiful because we had a hazard ratio of 0.52, which means like half of the patients have responded. But what it showed now with 3 years that it actually prolongs life. And we had one patient who came, the first patient to be treated in a phase 1. She was treated 7 years ago and she came to talk to us. So it was really amazing. But when you have something like this, the patients, need it. And when you have, patients that have that probably will die after a year, you cannot wait until you have approval at the FDA and so on. So we opened, even for a small company like ours, we opened as soon as we saw the data, an early access program, and started basically with treating patients before even the the approval. And so this was, a year and a half now that we launched the drug, or we had the approval. We are now approved in 30 countries, and just shows you the unmet medical need and how we're working really with the sense of urgency, basically, to bring it to patients everywhere.
It takes real dedication. It's very interesting about the patient with 7 years of experience. Is that common for all of you to bring patients into the company to tell their stories to the staff?
I mean, I'll answer, Kevin. We bring patients in because we treat many rare diseases, actually, and we bring patients in all the time. We bring them into our plasma centers where people are donating plasma. We bring them into our manufacturing sites to present. I've brought them into many of our researchers. And we actually now have a few patients on some of our clinical trial teams, actually, as we design some of our trials.
Is that common for the rest of you?
Yeah, so maybe
patients coming in.
Sure. So, Kevin, as like I'm sure the other organizations and other teams, I think patients are very central. Like when we think of clinical trials, we do basically look at, what is it a patient wants in a clinical trials? What is his inputs? How do we change the PRO and our endpoint strategy? So their inputs are taken right from, as we're thinking of, a development program, right from phase 1 into phase 3 or 4, depending on the disease state and where the regulatory pathway is. They are a big part of the disease continuum. Their inputs play a huge role. I mean, when you think of the FDAs and the EMAs, that is a question they ask. What patient engagement activity did you take? What did you listen? What are your instruments? So in many ways, a lot of the instrumentation that we have from a PRO perspective or a co-op perspective is the patient very central to that conversation. So yes, and we were there last week for another meeting with patients coming and telling us their story. But I'm sure this is across the industry, and I'm sure my colleagues would say the same. Thank you.
Yeah, we do the same. In fact, we had ASMD Awareness Day today, and we did have patients as well. So that was very, very, very inspiring. And I totally agree with both of you in terms of the patient's voice. That's why we're doing the drug development, right? We're doing it for patients. So we really do need to listen to their voices and have that close collaboration. I think that's really key. We also established a managed access program prior to Lipidus Alpha approval.
I think there is another aspect, sorry to interrupt you, but there is another aspect is also scientists, our R&D cycle is really long. And you need to give also, the reasons to believe for the scientist. And so that works as well to really show the scientist why we're here and why we do what we do.
Totally
Inspiration and passion. You're all reinforcing what a lot of my rare disease contacts always say, start with the patients very, very early to learn and to best fit development programs for their needs. So that's quite amazing. So Bill, let's hear a little bit from you as well. So tell us why you chose to focus on that disease state and how significant is the unmet medical need? I think you covered that a little bit, but maybe you could elaborate.
I'll come back to it quickly, but I just want to pick up on Bahijah's point. I mean, for the scientists and the researchers who are so far from the final clinical end, mostly, I mean, they deal with so much failure. It's so great for them to both see the success and to stay connected. So it's so important. And this disease is no different. I mean, people have been suffering for this for a long time. Again, it's hemophilia B, a relatively rare bleeding disorder. Used to be called Christmas disease, because the first patient where they characterized factor IX was Stephen Christmas in Oxford. And it is associated with debilitating bleeding that can cripple people and lead to morbidity and early mortality. And of course, in the 80s, these poor patients died of hepatitis A, B, and C, as well as AIDS, until the blood supply caught up with the antiviral techniques. And as I said, we've been in this business because we've been collecting plasma for many years and treating immunodeficiencies in others, but obviously been producing plasma-derived factor 8 for hemophilia A and factor 9 for hemophilia B to prevent bleeding. So it was a natural progression then to go to a recombinant and then finally to find gene therapy, because we believe in continuing to disrupt ourselves in the interest of the patient, and that's what we think this is. So this gene therapy has really been a result of decades of research across the country and the world, and into both factor 9 and the complexities there, and gene and viral vectors and the proper ones. And there's 9 or 10 adeno-associated viruses you can use to get to the liver, where this therapy is expressed. This one expresses adeno-associated virus 5. But, I think someone said it was, I think Monica said 15 or 20 years ago it started. I mean, I think the first patient or the first attempt at this was done in the early 2000s. And then we went into phase 1 in the 2010s. In that decade, and then finally, of course, got it to phase 3 towards the end of the end of 2020. So it's been a long road to get here, and with plenty of challenges as well. With gene therapy, I like to say, efficacy giveth, but safety taketh away. And so, of course, there's acknowledged worries about gene therapy. What's going to do? What's the implication of this? Happily, we've gone slowly and had seen no integration events or anything that would concern us. People with hemophilia, because they've had hepatitis A, B, and C, and often have chronic hepatitis C or cured hepatitis C from the contaminated blood products they've gotten. Because this therapy works in the liver, you're doubly worried about a secondary cancer in the liver, and so that's been part of our program and something we've kept a close eye on. But in addition, of course, we'll be monitoring patients. Even though they get one treatment, we'll be monitoring them for years after this to make sure that there's no untoward events from the therapy. But if you ask a couple of interesting challenges, well, one, of course, is people with rare diseases, they don't want to get placebo, right? And so how do you design a trial where you show a comparator, but you also show your effect, and with the rare patients with rare disease getting a therapy. So we designed to allow them to stay on factor 9 therapy, but half got gene therapy, and then flipped over the other half that hadn't gotten the gene therapy to get the gene therapy once the trial was over. But of course, we showed a superiority over active therapy because they just wouldn't be on placebo. I think the second,
and that was a choice. That was the choice of the placebo patients that they could then move to.
Correct. They didn't have to. That was they were offered that option, and I think probably my colleagues would say something similar, that you have to get your comparison, but also then offer the treatment if you think it's
right,
if it's real. Second thing is communities talk, and they want to know that they're getting the best thing. The other thing with our infusion is one infusion and you're done, and so the infusion has to go perfect. If you're giving an injection every 2 weeks or something, you might get a little leakage. Okay, that's unfortunate, but hey, you can make up for it. It's one and done with this, and so you have to do each infusion as perfectly as possible to make sure that people are getting the benefit. And we had a couple of infusions, unfortunately, didn't go perfectly, and we saw that. We saw factor levels not quite as high. But the pretty cool thing is again, these people have almost no intrinsic factor IX levels, and with this therapy and with the modified Padua variant that we saw factor levels now at 40 and 50% and staying up for, as I said, 3, 4, 5 years. And we had an estimate done by ICER, the comparative effectiveness, saying that they predicted our therapy would last over 20 years. So that's amazing. And so,
excellent. And family response, what has that been like? We talked about sort of patients coming in to speak with us at our companies.
So the family response to the therapy, the first 3 people treated were all one family. So the father got it, and our treatment is only approved in people 18 and over, and which is you'd expect with gene therapy, right? They want to make sure it's safe in adults before they allow children to get it. The father got it, and his treatment went so well, his sons got it as well, and so they're all doing great, and they're living a life they never thought they would, where they're going away on vacation without any treatment with them, and that's an amazing experience, especially because I had a friend in high school who had hemophilia B, and he was essentially a functional cripple from all of his debilitating bleeds, and to think about these kids versus my friend, it's quite a remarkable difference in a few generations.
Well, that's a great story, and maybe a bit of a segue. Maybe we could go around the group in terms of lessons that you've learned or that your company's learned from all those experiences that maybe could add to a better public awareness or understanding or appreciation for the innovation process surrounding a rare disease product. What's a key lesson that you've learned that you would impart to the audience today?
I guess I'll start because I'm probably off mute.
Sure.
Just how long it takes, and how much is involved in getting there, and really the man and woman hours per patient who's actually ultimately going to be treated is actually quite remarkable. And while these treatments all have high price tags, the value they're bringing to the patients and to society is enormous, and I can't really be underestimated what they're doing.
Very good.
Yeah, maybe I can go next, Bill. So, this is a very painful journey for many patients. 1 in 38 patients don't make it to a doctor because they die because of the condition. When you talk to among the most advanced countries, and if you ask dermatologists, have you even seen this? They will tell you they may have seen 1 or 2. So the problem is, you have to identify, and you have to really ask yourself, is this the condition which I've always thought to be psoriasis, or is this GPP, which is a more acute form? And not everyone gets a chance to meet a dermatologist. Those who do, 35% land up in the ER. And in ER, most of the times, the physician may want to treat this as a cellulitic condition, a patient with maybe Stevens-Johnson syndrome, someone who needs antibiotics. So there is an innate need to teach, to educate, and to learn. But because they are so far in between, the education process will take time. It's not standard for us, and at least in medical school, to understand those diseases until we have seen them or treated them or seen someone in the ward or someone coming up and saying, do you know this is the difference? Then the other thing is the patient. Many patients think, I've got a condition, I'm going to live with it, because for the last 6 times I've gone to a doctor, he thinks this is a normal skin condition, but he doesn't quite understand it's also a systemic condition. So education plays a huge role. And so that 2 components. So advocacy will play a role. Education, working with different institutions will help. And I think it is also the fact that, we have to enable ecosystems in a healthcare to say, look, are they willing to go and explore and say, let's make access possible? Let's have an open education and a dialogue, because it's not that it's an expensive patient. you want to treat the right patient. And today's treatment in rare disease is precision medicine. And I think this is some of the things that we need to do. It's multifactorial, multi-system. If we can't get this fixed, however much innovation we have, patients will never get it. Just putting one side of and I'm sure my colleagues would say, I hope something similar or different. I'd love to learn from them.
I think
that's great. Thank you.
Yeah, I can go, just not to repeat what was said, which I agree with. I think maybe to add to it that being very close to the patients and to the investigators, they know their patients. You learn a lot. You sometimes, it makes a difference between walking away and actually persevering. And then I think the second thing I would say is, once you have a positive trial, the work just starts. When you have, and to what Arup said, you have to work on not only the diagnosis, the education, but also, how to administer the drug and how the side effects and so on. So the work really just starts once on the market.
And I echo what everybody has said as well. I think the other one thing I would add to that is that because this is a very, very rare, small population, and there's a lack of understanding of the disease, we are already starting from a place where we have to understand the disease and study it, and then choose the correct endpoints. And that is extremely challenging. And you're also, you have to talk to various regulators also to ensure that they agree with the endpoints that you were choosing and that they are clinically relevant. So I think that, that's another piece to even begin the clinical trials. And part of that also involves listening to your patients and making sure that you hear what's important to them, because those endpoints will be the clinical ones, but also the PROs, right?
Yeah, these are great lessons learned. Kara is listening from Galien, and if there are audience questions, if you can draw them to my attention. But I'd like to ask the panel first. How does the system need to change? Regulatory, pricing, access. How does the system need to change to ensure that we can get these innovations to patients now and in the future?
I'll start, Kevin. Because we've been facing this, with gene therapy. As again, it's a single treatment, and of course, our whole system is based on reimbursement over time,
right?
With treatments, right? And in other countries that have a single payer system, they can say, okay, we hold all the costs of treatment. So whether, they may not like paying it all up front, but they understand that if it's going to last 20 years, they're paying for the patient up front rather than all along, because hemophilia is an expensive treatment, expensive disease to treat year after year with hospitalizations and other things. Now the payers have to figure out how to pay for something where the patient may go to 3 different payer plans during that time, and how do they transfer costs, or does one pay for it up front and then everybody else gets off scot-free, or do they figure it out? And I know the payers are talking not in a non-anti-competitive way. They're talking about how do we do this and going forward, where these treatments will benefit multiple payer plans, but one payer is responsible for them. So, they're talking. I don't think they've solved it yet, but they're certainly talking. The other thing is a guarantee that the therapy works. If you're going to pay a lot, guarantee me 5 years or more of successful treatment. And I think some of that's coming too.
Interesting.
If I may, I think it's a great question. I think something that haunts us many a time. Regulators tend to want to listen, at least to the conversation on how do you bring effective therapies to the patients. They're open, at least some regulatory agencies are opening to listening. They do challenge, which is a very active conversation that we have with our FDAs, the EMAs in Japan or anywhere in the world. The question is then the payers, and I think delaying treatment doesn't mean saving money. delaying treatment, I think the education really is when you're looking at treatment, which is effective versus standard of care. And, many, at least single payers will say, look, my standard of care, which you did not quite put into your trial design, perhaps works. Now, many of them are quite educated. And one of the things that we need to do is, as pharma, we take very responsible decisions in our pricing scenarios. It's not a number that you just throw out there and say, guys, you go and make it happen. A lot of thought, it's more than science, it's an art, it's an understanding of each of the healthcare ecosystems. So it's a very responsible thing to do. And the conversation is, payers have to understand that they have to be a meaningful part of the conversation. The more you delay a patient, the more the outcomes are adversely affecting an ecosystem. Take one patient, the more you delay, the more health cost, the more burden it is, not just to the ecosystem, but the entire community. Productivity goes down. It's a conversation we must have. It cannot be just a few conversations and, pharma is seen as the bad guys. In rare diseases, the bad guys, we're part of a solution. I think we need to come together and address that head on. Whether we like it or not, we have to innovate. We have to be responsible in how we price our products. And we'll have to figure out mechanisms, and through innovation, there are lots of innovative pricing options.
Maybe I'll go into another aspect is the fact that, these are really innovative products. And when we think about, the pricing, we've heard, and it's true for all of us, these innovations take 20 years or something, but they bring meaningful, solutions, not just incremental. And I think when we think about the payers, we have to think about the budget. And the more we free up the budget of the payers by hopefully using more generics and biosimilars and so on. So maybe that's going to surprise you coming from me, but I really believe it frees up then that part of the budget to pay for innovation. We need to think about that as an industry and for the payers as well.
I think what I would add to that is that I think, Arup, you've alluded to this, that, it takes a village. So pharmaceutical companies are one stakeholder in this, and it's going to take a collective effort of society to really address this issue. I think you also mentioned that, regulators are understand and are collaborative of the fact that, these are rare diseases. And so it cannot be regular drug development, that there has to be a lot of creativity involved. And in that creativity also comes the innovation, because you have to figure out ways to show that your drug is effective, not using unconventional methodology. In terms of the value, I think that payers also need to be sensitive to consider the broader benefits to society, right? So it's the patients, their families, and it's not just isolated to the healthcare system.
Very good. So a lightning round. We've got a couple minutes left. For the panel, what sorts of innovations in rare diseases might the Galien Awards Committee be reviewing 5 years from now?
Novel technologies that we can't even think about today.
Mm-hmm. Things are moving so fast.
So I think in the area of enzyme replacement therapy and lysosomal storage disorders, one unmet medical need is the central nervous system manifestations of the disease. So we have, we address the systemic manifestations, but we haven't addressed the CNS manifestations as well yet. So I think that that would be one area to focus on. The other area I think to focus on would be, we see eugenics, but we're going to, I think, see more gene therapy as time goes on. I know Sanofi is, we opened up a genomic medical center in 2020, We are very focused on bringing various platforms to fruition.
Excellent. Well, we're out of time. I'll just close us out. Firstly, by thanking all four of you for participating today. Your gift of time has been terrific. And for the audience, the webcast is available and viewable through October on the Galien Foundation's homepage, which is www.galienfoundation.org. And we look forward to seeing everybody live and in person on Thursday night for the USA Awards event at the Roy Vagelos Galien Pro Bono Humanum Award, followed by dinner at the American Museum of Natural History in New York. So again, my esteemed panelists, thank you so much for your gift of time, and look forward to staying connected.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Have a good evening.
Bye-bye.